Terry Adams stood silent as armed officers swarmed through his home. Suits were ripped from wardrobes, files were stacked in boxes. A lifetime of secrets seized in minutes. For decades he had been untouchable. On this morning, that illusion ended. The target was not an illegal den or a hidden stash house. It was the home of a man long whispered about in London's underworld, Terry Adams. The name had been feared for decades. But this was not about shootings or illegal substance shipments. This was about money, a lot of it. The raid was the result of months of planning.
Jamaican yardie gangs, and so Tommy had sort of got involved in those sides of the business.
It was part of a wider investigation into a £20.8 million VAT fraud. A paper empire built on fake companies, false invoices, and money that vanished across borders. The kind of fraud that could move millions without a single bullet fired. But it was tied to Britain's most feared corrupt family. The officers moved fast. The front door smashed open. Every room searched. Inside, they found evidence that would shake the foundations of the Adams family's power. Stacks of paperwork. Detailed financial records. Lists of transactions. Hard drives. Mobile phones. And cash. Always cash. In a locked cabinet, they found jewelry worth tens of thousands. In another, artwork and antiques that looked out of place in the modest property. The items were seized without hesitation. Anything linked to criminal proceeds would be gone by the end of the day. Outside, neighbors whispered. Some had lived next to the Adams home for years. Few had ever seen much activity. The man at the center of it all had cultivated an image of quiet respectability. To them, the raid looked shocking, almost out of place on their quiet street. But behind closed doors, many admitted they had always felt a quiet fear. They avoided eye contact when the name Adams was spoken. To them, this moment felt less like a mistake and more like a truth finally dragged into the light. The operation stretched beyond one address. Several other properties were raided across London, each one connected to a chain of shell companies and false invoices. It was the paper trail of a fraud that spanned years. And at its center, men whose names carried weight in the most dangerous corners of the capital. The Adams family had been linked to ferocity for decades, but the police had always struggled to secure convictions for homicide or large-scale illegal trafficking. This was different. The VAT fraud was easier to trace. Numbers did not lie the way witnesses sometimes did. Bank transfers, invoices, and tax filings formed a map, and that map pointed directly to the top. But it raises a question. When criminal families can move millions without a single bullet fired, is this kind of fraud more dangerous than the crimes we usually picture? As officers catalogued items, they worked under tight security. These were not just any suspects. This was the Clerkenwell misconduct syndicate. The family that had survived gang wars, police crackdowns, and years of media scrutiny. The family that controlled parts of North London through fear and reputation. But this time, their power could not stop the warrants. The scene inside the house was a mix of wealth and control. Expensive suits hung neatly in wardrobes. Designer watches sat in boxes. A wine cellar with bottles worth more than most weekly wages. Everything spoke of money, but the books told a different story. In one office, a desk was covered in files. Some looked like legitimate business accounts. Others were less convincing. Payments to companies that did not exist. Invoices for goods never delivered. It was a web designed to confuse, to make the money look clean. In the garage, officers found more. A high-end car registered under another name, keys to safety deposit boxes, receipts for property purchases abroad. Evidence that the fraud had funded a lifestyle well beyond what could be declared to tax authorities. As the morning wore on, the scale of the operation became clear. This was not just about one man or one address. It was a coordinated strike. A message that no one, not even Britain's most feared family, was beyond reach. The arrests were swift. Terry Adams was taken from his home without resistance. Others linked to the fraud were also detained. Each one faced a charge that carried the weight of years in prison. No one spoke. Silence had always been the Adams family's way. The vans left the street by mid-morning. Behind them, they left houses stripped of anything that could be used as evidence. Residents stepped outside, still trying to process what they had seen. For some, it was a shock. For others, it was a long time coming. But what the officers carried out of those homes would reveal far more than jewelry or cash. If you find stories like this important, consider subscribing for more. In police headquarters, the evidence began to pile up. Dozens of boxes filled with documents, laptops ready for forensic analysis, bank statements that painted a picture more valuable than any confession. For the detectives leading the case, this was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Not a homicide weapon, not a witness brave enough to testify, but numbers. Cold, unchanging numbers. And they were enough to finally open the door to the courtroom. The bust made headlines across the UK, not because of the fraud alone, but because of who was accused of orchestrating it. The Adams family name was back in the spotlight. Only this time the story was about tax fraud, not gangland carnages. But beneath the headlines, there was a deeper sense of significance. This was the start of the end for a criminal empire that had lasted decades. Still, many wondered, was this really enough to bring them down? Or would the Adams family find a way to slip through the net again? The streets of North London had seen their power before, and some feared they might see it again. The Adams family was known in their area, not for kindness, not for community work, for fear. They were a large family, strong connections, a long reach. At the top was Terry Adams, calm in public, ruthless in private. Terry was born in Islington, London, grew up in a working-class household. Learned early that power came from respect and intimidation. School didn't hold him. The streets did. His brothers, Tommy and Patrick, followed the same path. Together, they built an empire. Extortion, money laundering. They hid behind businesses, clubs, bars, property. But everyone knew where the real money came from. The family valued loyalty, not just within the bloodline, friends, associates. Even neighbors were pulled into their world. Some willingly, some through fear. People didn't cross them. You didn't talk. You didn't refuse a favor. You didn't ask questions. Their influence spread far beyond their postcode. Other gangs wanted alliances. The Adams family decided who moved in and who stayed out. They were the gatekeepers of their patch. Fierceness was part of the deal, not loud street fights. Quiet, efficient, and final. If you crossed them, you disappeared. Terry wasn't the only leader. Tommy was known as the enforcer, a man who didn't hesitate. Patrick was the organizer. He managed contacts, kept the business smooth. They were three different parts of the same machine. Money flowed, and with it came a lifestyle that didn't match their official income. Designer clothes, expensive holidays, cars worth more than some houses, but they stayed just careful enough. No flashy public displays. They let rumors build instead. Rumors were useful. Their family home was guarded in ways you couldn't always see. Cameras, secure gates, trusted people, watching the street. Visitors were vetted. Strangers noticed. The community watched from a distance. Police had tried before to bring them down. Raids, arrests, but witnesses withdrew. Evidence went missing. Cases collapsed. Officers knew it wasn't luck. The Adams family had ways of keeping people silent. They didn't just deal with substances. They laundered money through legitimate businesses, bought property under other names, invested in ventures that seemed clean. On paper, they were businessmen. In reality, they were one of the most feared organized illegal groups in the UK. Their reputation reached beyond the criminal world. Some locals saw them as protectors, the type who would handle trouble when the police didn't. Others lived in quiet terror. No one admitted it openly. But it was in the way people avoided eye contact when their name came up. Family gatherings were private, tight-knit. Children grew up shielded from outsiders. But many were already part of the next generation of the operation, learning how to survive, how to intimidate, how to win. They weren't reckless. Every move was planned, every deal was calculated. Mistakes were rare. They had lawyers ready, accountants who knew how to hide money, contacts inside important places. It made them untouchable for decades. But wealth and influence didn't come without enemies. Other groups wanted the same territory. Younger gangs were ambitious. The Adams family dealt with them, sometimes with talks, sometimes with force. By the early 2000s, they had become a symbol in the British underworld. They were spoken about in pubs, in prisons, and in police stations. You didn't need to explain who the family was. People already knew. The brothers weren't just criminals, they were strategists. They understood fear as currency. They understood trust as an investment. They made people feel they had no other choice but to work with them or stay out of the way. For a long time, the police couldn't make anything stick. Cases were complex. Informants vanished. Juries hesitated. It was frustrating for detectives who had spent years trying to break the family's hold. Adams didn't speak to the press. They didn't pose for cameras. Their image was shaped by others. A mix of myth and reality. That mystery kept them powerful. Patrick was often seen in public, but never alone. Always with someone who could be trusted. Always watching the surroundings. Tommy preferred to stay in the background until he was needed. Terry could charm when he wanted to, but behind that was a man used to getting exactly what he demanded. Their rise wasn't sudden. It was steady, built over years. Built on fear, silence, and control. It made them harder to dismantle. There was no single weak link to pull. By the time law enforcement started making progress, the family had already shaped the criminal landscape around them. They had set the rules, decided who could play, and punished those who didn't. Every member of the family knew the risks. Prison was possible, but survival was the priority. And survival meant adapting. When one door closed, they opened another. When heat came, they moved operations. They watched each other's backs. Red fluid came first, business came second, but both were fiercely protected. Behind closed doors, they were just family, eating together, laughing, arguing. But even in those moments, the business was never far away. A call could change the atmosphere instantly. A deal gone wrong, a problem that needed fixing. The Adams family had built more than a criminal empire. They had built a network of loyalty and fear that went beyond money. It was the foundation of their power, and it would take more than a single raid or arrest to shake it. The family's rise began quietly. It didn't start with fierceness, it started with trust. Adam had a way of making people feel safe. He spoke softly, he didn't rush. Neighbors thought he was just a hard worker. They didn't see the deals in the background. His brothers were always close. They grew up in the same streets, same school, same friends. Their bond was deep. The first jobs were small, deliveries for people they knew. Money came fast. It felt easy. It felt safe. Soon there were bigger offers, packages from outside the city, cars with hidden compartments. Adam was cautious. He never kept things at home. He built contacts through friends of friends. Meetings happened in car parks. Phones were swapped often. Cash was counted in silence. By the second year, they had a network. Different drivers for different routes. No one knew the full picture except the family. That made them strong. It also made them dangerous. They didn't see themselves as criminals. They told each other it was just business. No one was getting hurt. No one complained. The money was too good, but the money changed them. New cars appeared outside the house. Designer clothes. Holidays abroad. Neighbors noticed, but no one spoke up. Inside the family, roles were clear. Adam handled the main deals. His brothers did the driving. Others stored goods in safe flats. Every success made them bolder. Risk felt smaller each time. They started bringing in larger shipments. Contacts from overseas trusted them. They avoided open conflict. If a deal went wrong, they walked away. They believed patience kept them safe, and for years it worked. The local community knew rumors, but no one had proof. Police had suspicions, but the family didn't slip up. Their mother stayed quiet. She never asked questions. Some said she didn't want to know. Others believed she knew everything. The turning point came when they expanded. A friend introduced them to a new supplier. The goods were higher quality. Demand exploded. With more products came more problems. Other groups wanted in. Some tried to take their territory. Adam refused to back down. They tightened security. Meetings were only with trusted people. Phones were used once, then thrown away. But greed crept in. They wanted more cities, more contacts abroad, more profit. That's when the first real mistake happened. One driver kept a shipment, longer than agreed. It went missing. The loss was big. Arguments followed. Trust between certain members began to crack. Some people started talking outside the group. Police picked up small bits of information. They started linking faces. They began following cars. They watched houses. Adam noticed unmarked vehicles near his home. He told everyone to be careful. They laid low for weeks, but demand didn't stop. The moment they thought it was safe, they moved again. This time, faster, bigger quantities. It was enough for the police to act. They had informants. They had surveillance. Every move was being recorded. The operation that took years to build was now under watch, and the family had no idea. The trial date was set, the courtroom was full, reporters filled the seats, police officers sat in the back, family members were present. The atmosphere was tense. Each defendant was brought in separately. The public stared. Some shook their heads, others whispered quietly. The prosecution began with the scale of the operation. They spoke about the value of goodies. They described the network's reach. Evidence from the raids was displayed. Bags of white powder, photos of cash, messages from encrypted devices. The jury listened. Some looked uncomfortable. The judge remained focused. Witnesses were called. Police officers gave their accounts. One officer described the moment the hidden compartment was found. Another detailed the forensic process. Financial experts explained the money trail. The prosecution used a timeline. They showed how each member of the family played a role. They spoke about communication between them. They linked the evidence to specific dates. No detail was left out. Watching the case unfold, some wondered, would years of whispers and failed cases finally end here? Or would the Adams family slip through the net again, just as they had so many times before? The defense tried to challenge the claims. They questioned the methods used by police. They argued some evidence was circumstantial. They pointed out the lack of fingerprints on certain packages. They suggested that some cash could not be directly linked. The jury stayed quiet. Every word was recorded. The trial lasted weeks. Each day brought new evidence. Each day the family faced more pressure. There were moments when relatives avoided eye contact with the defendants. The weight of the case was clear. In closing arguments, the prosecution spoke of greed. They said the operation damaged the community. They reminded the jury of the lives affected by illegal substances. They repeated that this was not victimless misconduct. The defense urged the jury to doubt. They asked them to look for gaps in the story. They claimed the police wanted a headline case. They questioned the reliability of some witnesses. After days of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. The room was silent as they left. Family members of the defendants waited outside. Some paced in the hallway, some sat with their heads in their hands. The wait lasted hours. Finally, the jury returned. Everyone stood. The foreman read the verdicts. Guilty. One by one, each name was read. Each faced multiple charges: conspiracy to supply white powder, money laundering, possession with intent to supply. The judge thanked the jury for their service. He then addressed the defendants, spoke of the damage done to the community, of the planning involved. He said they had shown no sign of stopping until they were caught. Sentences were announced, years in prison for each. The total combined sentence was decades. Some defendants remained still. Others showed signs of emotion. One shook their head in disbelief. Another looked down at the floor. Outside, the police gave a statement. They said the case had been a long and complex investigation. They praised the officers involved. Community leaders also spoke. They said the arrests sent a clear message. They urged young people to avoid the path of misconduct. They reminded residents that illegal money often comes with ferocity. Neighbors in the area expressed mixed feelings. Some felt relief. Others were shocked at how close the operation had been to home. Inside prison, the family members were separated. They were sent to different facilities. The life they had built was gone. The houses, the cars, the cash, all seized. Court orders allowed police to recover further assets. Bank accounts were frozen, properties were sold, luxury items were auctioned. The case became a point of reference for police across the country. It was studied as an example of how family ties can be used in organized acts. It was also seen as proof that no one was untouchable. Months later, appeals were filed. Some argued the sentences were too long. Others claimed procedural errors. The appeals were rejected. The community slowly returned to normal, but the memory of the case remained. It was a reminder of how easily corruption can hide behind closed doors. The final image was clear: a family once united by relations, now divided by prison walls, bound not by loyalty, but by the consequences of their choices. The Adams case was more than a family downfall. It was a reminder that organized crime does not only live in shadows, it can hide in boardrooms, bank accounts, and even respectable homes. For the neighbors who whispered, and for the city that had lived under their shadow, the case proved something chilling. The most dangerous empires do not always need guns. Sometimes they only need silence.